Scriptures of the 21st Century, Part 6, Moab, Amon and Esav. Last week we took a deep dive into the history of the modern Palestinians and how they have been shown to have descended from the Canaani, or the Canaanites, who, in the time of Avraham, occupied the territory we now know as Eretz-Yisra'el. Eretz-Yisra'el was promised as a rightful inheritance for all the descendants of Avraham through the covenant which Yahweh cut with him 1 year before the birth of Yitzhak, Abraham's second son. We also considered how the modern Palestinian claim over Eretz-Yisra'el is being constantly backed up by many nations of the world, along with many leading Christian institutions. For example, the World Council of Churches, who together with the nations are constantly demanding that there be a two-state solution, and that be established to bring about what they call just peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Is there any justification for the Palestinian state as to be established? After all, at no stage in history have they ever been a national body. What's more, the present Palestinian population did not emerge from the shadows of history until the modern State of Israel was declared in 1948. Even at that stage, they were simply occupying the land that had been wrested from the Ottoman Empire during World War I. They were not rightful owners for that part of the territory. They simply squatted there while claiming ownership under the British mandate. Even though the Palestinian population had no legal rights to the territory, they claimed the establishment of the State of Israel on the 15th of May 1948 was for them a Nakba, a day of catastrophe, which saw most of their population flee to the surrounding Arab nations, with the greater majority crossing the river into the kingdom of Jordan. But the truth is that most departed from Eretz-Yisra'el at the behest of the king of Jordan during the invasion of Israel by the 5 Arab neighbours. That all took place against the backdrop of the UN's Resolution 181, which was formulated on the 29th of November in 1947. And it called for the division of Palestine into 2 separate states, one for the Jewish community and one for the Palestinians. While the Jewish community accepted the plan, the Arab community outrightly rejected it. That led to a significant continuous conflict, particularly over Jerusalem, and it was considered under a special international law, considering it as a separate entity. Hence, because of the Palestinians' refusal to recognize the United Nations Resolution 181, it was never ratified as international law. Instead, just 1 year after the formation of the State of Israel, on the 3rd of April 1949, Israel, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria and Jordan all signed the Armistice Agreement, which brought about an end to the Arab-Israeli War. That was soon followed by Jordan annexing Judea and Samaria, which became known, of course, as the West Bank. Rather than following through with the United Nations Resolution 181, Jordan gave the Palestinian refugees Jordanian citizenship, regardless of which side of the river they called home. That actually inflamed the relations between Jordan and the other 4 Arab nations. But it still did not stifle the Palestinian demands that they were the rightful owners of the disputed territories west of the Yarden River. Jordan's annexation of the West Bank became part of what it called Greater Syria, an expansionist policy against which Saudi Arabia, Lebanon and Syria, along with Egypt, they demanded that Jordan be expelled from the restored Arab League. However, the expulsion was prevented by two dissenting votes, one from Yemen and the other from Iraq. Hence, on the 12th of June 1950, the Arab League publicly saved face by declaring that the annexation of the West Bank was a temporary measure, claiming that Jordan was holding the territory as trustees pending a two-state solution. In response, just 3 years later, King Hussein of Jordan publicly announced that East Jerusalem was the alternative capital to the Hashemite kingdom and would subsequently form an integral and inseparable part of Jordan. However, it must be remembered that even the kingdom of Jordan itself only existed after the creation through the British mandate. It was following the Cairo conference of March 21 that it was Abdullah bin Hussein who was appointed to administer the whole territory, which became known as Transjordan. However, on the 25th of May 1946, Abdullah gained independence from the British rule, which then became the Hashemite Kingdom of Transjordan. That occurred in 1949. The new independent Abdullah was duly crowned as king. Abdullah I was the 38th generation descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. He had been born in Mecca when it was part of the Ottoman Empire. That made him a direct descendant of Yishma'el, the firstborn son of Avraham, and a true Arab. However, Abdullah was king over a tripartite nation, which comprised the descendants of ancient Moab, Amon and Esav. The first two were directly descended from the line of Aaron through his nephew Lot, while the third group were the descendants of Esav, or Esau, the twin brother of Yaakov, Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. So it is totally understandable why the 4 Arab nations were indignant about Abdullah giving citizenship to the Palestinians. Even though Abdullah himself was an Arab, he was ruling a tripartite nation that was not part of the family of Yishma'el. The Palestinians were not Arabs. That is an important feature to keep in mind, because during this current Middle Eastern crisis, none of the Arab nations have absorbed any of the Palestinian refugees. Even the Kingdom of Jordan, who initially gave them citizenship, have also cut themselves away from both the PLO and the Palestinian National Authority. As we have seen during the last period since 7th of October 2023, no Arab state has accepted any Palestinian refugees from either Gaza or the West Bank. Even Egypt, who governed Gaza from 1949 to 67, are still refusing to take displaced Palestinians. So the Palestinian problem remains an unsolved geopolitical nightmare for all the nations of the world. Now, returning to the scriptures, we see that the promise that was made to Avraham through the first land covenant in Bereshit, Genesis chapter 15, verse 18, resulted in all the territory of the Arabian Peninsula becoming the rightful possession of the descendants of Yishma'el. But there was no mention of any people groups from outside the immediate family circle. Then in the second land covenant in Bereshit chapter 17, verse 7, Yahweh established his covenant directly with Avraham through the blood of circumcision, ensuring that all the territory of the Canaanite, as we now know as Eretz-Yisra'el, would forever belong to the descendants of Yitzhak and Yaakov. So what about the kingdom of Jordan? As we saw earlier, it was made up of two national groups, Moab and Ammon, both of which descended from Abraham's nephew Lot, and, of course, the descendants of Esav. As we know from Bereshit chapter 13, when Avraham returned from his time in Egypt, he and Lot parted company because of the increased number of flocks and herds each had acquired. So Lot selected the well-watered Arava, or Jordan Valley, and Avraham was left with the stony high country of Canaan. But Lot did not know at that time, when he was choosing the best pastoral land, that it was soon to be destroyed by Yahweh. Hence, following the destruction of the region of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot was left with two childless daughters, who incestuously became the forebearers of Moab and Ammon through their father. At no stage did Yahweh ever offer land inheritance to either Moab or Ammon. In fact, they became hidden among the tribes of Yishma'el as sojourners within the land of their cousins. But they never gave up challenging Israel over the rights to the territory of Eretz-Yisra'el. When Avraham and Lot parted company, Avraham travelled north to the place where he first built an altar to Yahweh. And as we read in chapter 13, verse 3, he came to Beit El, to the place where his tent had been in the beginning, between Beit El and Ai, where he had first built his altar, and there Avraham called upon the name of Yahweh. Then in verses 14 through 18, Yahweh gave Avraham a much needed assurance that he had been found acceptable in the sight of God, and that his descendants would be given the rightful inheritance of all that took place at Beit El. Further, it is interesting that today's parashah, Vayitzi, he went out, starts with Yaakov's grandson Avraham, the grandson of Avraham, setting out on his journey to the family of origin to find himself a wife. Bereshit 28, verses 11 through 22, explain how Yaakov, in his dream, saw the ladder extending from the ground up to heaven. It was truly significant that where he had that dream was also at Beit El, the very place where Yahweh had assured his grandfather Avraham about the future. Yaakov, in his dream, also received assurance about the future, where Yahweh said in 28 verses 13 and 14, I am Yahweh, the God of Avraham, your grandfather, and the God of Yitzhak. The land on which you are lying, I will give to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the grains of dust on the earth. You will expand to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. By you, all the descendants, you and your descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Those words Yahweh said to Yaakov are almost identical with what he had spoken to Avraham, also at Beit El. So returning to Lot's descendants, we find that nearly 500 years later, while Israel was camped on the plains of Moab, the nation of Moab themselves led Israel into sexual sin, as we find in Bamidbar, or Numbers, chapter 22 to 25. Then later again, during the time of the judges, Yahweh allowed Ammon, the second son of Lot, to attack Israel. Because Israel turned from worshipping Yahweh and were seeking after the Canaanite god Baal, their actions back then were not very much different from what the Nova festival was doing when it was in full swing on Shemini Atzeret, the 7th of October 23. Having endured 18 years of attack by Ammon and other foreign neighbours, Israel once again cried out to Yahweh for support in Judges chapter 10 verse 10. In response, Yahweh reminded Israel again that he had protected them on many occasions since they had left Egypt, and asked why he should support them yet again. After all, they were being constantly contemptuous towards him. In response to their pleadings, Yahweh told Israel, "Go and cry to the God you chose. Let them rescue you from your troubles." Those are the type of words that modern Israel should well expect to hear from Yahweh, given what had happened in Israel in the months leading up to the 7th of October. In response, Israel took the matters into their own hands, deciding whomever among them could lead a successful attack against Ammon would become their future leader. They chose a man called Yiftach, a soldier from Gilead, whose history is found in Judges chapter 11. Yiftach sent messengers to the king of Ammon asking, "What is your problem with us? Why are you invading our territory?" The king of Ammon answered Yiftach, "Because Israel took away my territory when you came up out of Egypt. They took everything from Arnon to the Yabok rivers. Now please restore it peacefully." That same lament is what the world is constantly hearing from the so-called Palestinians in the 21st century, who claim that they were the first inhabitants of Eretz-Yisra'el before Avraham arrived. The whole discourse is recorded in Judges chapter 11 and reflects the claims being made by the Palestinians even today. The concluding words uttered by Yiftach to the king of Ammon in Judges 11 verses 27 to 28 accurately sum up the modern dispute over Israel's territory when he said, "I have done you no wrong, but you are doing me wrong to war against me. May Yahweh be the judge today between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon." Doubtless, those same words will be invoked against the Palestinians, particularly in due course when Yeshua returns. But what was the response of that ancient king of Ammon? He paid no attention to the message of Yiftach. In the same way, the leaders today of the so-called Palestinian state, along with many national representatives in the UN, are still paying no attention to the message of the modern-day Yiftach, who is none other than, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu. The king of Ammon was trying to take possession of the land which he had no rights to. Yiftach, in response, said in Judges 11:24, "You should just keep the territory your God gave you, while I, for my part, will keep hold on to what Yahweh, our God, has given us." Those same words still apply today. The territorial dispute between Ammon and Israel during the time of Judges is at the root of that same dispute that is currently raging between the Palestinian National Authority and the modern State of Israel. Nothing has changed. So we see the three biological relatives of Avraham, Moab, Amon, and Esav, who together form the kingdom of Jordan, have their own territorial rights east of the Yarden River, and the modern State of Israel, which is the rightful homeland of the Jewish people, is the territory west of the Yarden River, as promised to Abraham through the line of Yitzhak and Yaakov. It was never promised to either Lot or Esav. However, the Palestinian National Authority, claim that they have sovereign rights over the land that was promised to Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and their descendants nearly 4,000 years ago, because the Canaani were there first. And as they are descended from the Canaani, they have rights to it also. Their current leader, President Mahmoud Abbas, on the 29th of November 2012, filed a resolution with the UN claiming non-member state status. In the resolution, he concluded with the words, "I say to you that the brave Palestinian people will not allow themselves to be a victim of a new Nakba or catastrophe. My people will continue with their epic, steadfast and eternal survival in the beloved land, every inch of which carries the evidence and the landmark affirming that their roots and unique connection throughout ancient history. There is no homeland for us except Palestine, and there is no land for us but Palestine." However, in Scripture, did Yahweh, the God of Israel, ever promise any portion of the territory west of the Yarden to any people group other than Israel? The answer is no. So on what basis did Mahmoud Abbas make such claims that his people would have a unique connection with the land west of the Yarden throughout ancient history? Yahweh did not place the Canaani in the territory west of the Yarden. When the people started dispersing from the Tower of Babel, it was the adversary who led the descendants of Canaan to that land, knowing full well that it was going to be promised by Yahweh to his chosen people. We will look more deeply at that situation next Shabbat as I conclude this series. If the Palestinian people had been descended from either Avraham or Lot, they would have been given their rightful inheritance east of the Yarden River. But even today, many of the Arab nations, including the Gulf states and the Kingdom of Jordan, reject the claims of the PNA leader and do not recognize the people of Palestine as Arabs. Therefore, the ethnic origins, as we now know, is from the Canaani. Even Yasser Arafat made the same claim when he was leader of the PLO. The truth is that the so-called Palestinians drifted into possession of Eretz-Yisra'el as squatters, simply filling a vacuum that had been created by the absence of Israel following the destruction of the Second Temple. Then, after the destruction, 60 years later, Hadrian, the Emperor of Rome, renamed Eretz-Yisra'el as Syria Palestinia, giving rise to the modern English term Palestine. However, that never changed the course of God's sovereign plan, for the land had been promised to Avraham, nor was it any basis for historical ties with the Palestinian people. Hence, the concluding words sent by Yiftach to the king of Ammon, Judges 27:28, accurately sum up the modern dispute over Israel's territory, where he said, "I have done you no wrong, but you are doing me wrong to war against me. May Yahweh be the judge. May Yahweh the judge be judged today between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon." In the same way, the leadership of the so-called State of Palestine, along with many other national representatives in the United Nations, and still paying no attention to the message that the modern Yiftach, who is none other than Benjamin Netanyahu, had sent. So in conclusion, it is very clear that the ancient nations of Moab and Ammon, along with Esav, who is now known as Edom, are still coveting what Lot gave away when he made his choice as to where to pasture his flocks and herds. Never has the situation changed. Never has Yahweh given the descendants of either Lot or the descendants of Esav any part of the land he promised to Avraham in Genesis 13 verses 14 through 18. After all, both Lot and Esav made their own free will choice. Therefore, they can't now covet what they willingly gave up. Benjamin Netanyahu, in his speech to the United Nations in 2016, made it abundantly clear that at no stage would the territory of the State of Israel nor the city of Jerusalem be available for negotiation. He was telling the nations of the world, you have a choice: establish a two-state solution on Israel's terms or face continued conflict. Having said that, neither the post-1967 border of Israel nor the city of Jerusalem have ever been up for negotiation. What he proposed, if a two-state solution was to occur, it was to be drawn up along the lines of the ancient scriptural narrative, underpinning the rights of Israel to retain sovereignty over the land west of the Yarden River forever. Therefore, unless the nations change their stance towards Israel-Palestinian conflict, they will all collectively face the wrath of Yahweh at the coming of Mashiach ben David, Yeshua the Messiah. They will have no basis upon which to say, we were not warned. The words of Benjamin Netanyahu in 2016 and subsequent speeches are on record. So when the wrath of God is poured out upon the nations in the near future, Israel will possess not only the western side of the Yarden, but also the territory of Moab, Amon and Esav on the eastern side. By not heeding the words of the modern Yiftach, the nations were and still are putting themselves on a collision course with Yahweh, the God of Israel. Finally, Yeshua, as the coming King of Israel, will make all the nations subservient to Israel, according to the words of both Isaiah and Obadiah. So next Shabbat, I shall conclude this video series by looking at how the current Middle Eastern crisis is not only being played out between the nations of the world, but it is also being played out in the heavenly realm. So until next week, Shabbat Shalom.